Thanks for joining me again for another video. This is going to be part 2 of our Orc ITC Terrain series. This time around we're going to be looking at the terrain, deciding how we want to make it our own. It's a very easy terrain to do that with. You can customize it and add some bibs and bobs to make it unique to your table. We're also going to look at adding some pieces to accompany the terrain. Sometimes you want more than just ruins or buildings on your table. ITC does make some nice woods if you want to go that route. In this case, we're going to do, I want my terrain to be a southwestern mesa desert type scheme. So what I want to do is add some hills. So we're going to do some foam hills, and we're going to be adding some additional textures to our buildings and ruins. So without further ado, why don't we get started with adding some texture, shall we? When it comes to materials for your terrain, there's lots of different things you can try, from the inexpensive to the grandiose. So one of the main materials I use is plasticard. A lot of people use plasticard, but this is just a for sale by owner sign that I got at Walmart for $1. These are great. You can cut them into lots of pieces and in different shapes and sizes, and you can actually kind of stack them on top of each other. They layer very well because they're so thin. Like, this is a very thin grade. Then we have this mesh, which is usually used for window screen, door screen. This is very inexpensive as well. This will cost you next to nothing. Also great for texture. It's not a super realistic texture for some things, like floor grading or whatever. It's not, but it adds that texture, and it's good for our purposes. You can also kind of reuse things that you pick up. Like, for example, this mesh I got from, it was lining the bottom of a pizza box. I've had a couple of sheets of these for years because a little bit goes a long way. This stuff is kind of hard to, I think you can get something similar. I think it's called granny grading, which is used for certain wool applications. I'm not sure what, but you can get it at the at your Michael's craft store or fabric stores. It's not expensive. A little harder to work with because you see how it's kind of rolled up a little bit. You have to, it doesn't glue extremely well. You have to use hot glue in many cases, or you could use epoxy, but you'll have to put books on top of it and hold it overnight to get it to stay. Then we can start talking about buying things. So this is plasticard, but it's thicker. Look at there's a very big difference between the thickness, there we go, of these two items. This is more expensive. This is the same company that also does this ribbed, like, I forgot what they call it. Anyways, this kind of corrugated steel looking stuff, which is great for roofs, especially orcish. We're gonna use this quite a bit. I'm gonna save this one for our buildings because I think those need the most texture. It's the same company that does this. It's the Evergreen scale models. You can get these at your train store, your train and hobby stores. There's not a whole lot left here. I was using it for another project, but there will be enough because this Frontline Gaming Terrain has plenty of, I mean, a lot of it is very good and has lots of little details, so we don't really need a lot of this. But yeah, I've got all kinds of stuff kind of just laying around from previous projects. You can also get like metal rods. They can be bent and stuff, which is really nice for different things. These are really good for example, flagpoles and stuff. I use them a lot for my orc boss poles, just because it's really sturdy metal, not like the soft Rhodium that your miniatures are made from. Okay. Then I have this, which I haven't really used yet. It's kind of precious. It's kind of the same purpose as this mash, except it's actually got a steel woven texture. So this is actually the best. This is Plastruct. The Plastruct is the other brand that's really good. And I've bought stuff from Plastruct before as well, obviously. So this is really good for your flooring and whatnot. We'll probably use a little bit of this. All right. So those are just some of the materials that you might want to use. You can also get Evergreen also sells plastic pipes and plastic channels, which are kind of like a square without one of the sides. And they also sell square-shaped kind of extrusions almost that you can use for. And they also sell I-beams, and you can use all that stuff for like kind of structural material to hold things together. So, for example, I just found that kind of rectangular channel piece. You can cut these. You can see I got it cut at an angle. They're very sturdy, but also have a little bit of give. And these are really great. Like I said, there's I-beams, there's pipes, there's all kinds of stuff. So if, like, for example, if we wanted to stick kind of a pipe sticking out with goop draining out of it, that's totally cool too. We're gonna keep it pretty simple for this video. I have the Goldensprue Cup coming up very soon, and I want to have these couple tables of terrain all ready to go. So without further ado, I'm gonna explain how we're going to attach these. For the most part, I'm going to use a hot glue gun. If I'm keeping it 100, which I always do, glue guns are not safe. These are not safe devices, especially if they're cheap. Cheap ones, I've had short out. So if this plastic covering separates, the hot glue can melt into the components and cause a short, possibly even a fire. So while it's cool, don't try pulling this trigger. Plug it in, let it totally heat up. The great thing about the glue gun is it is instant gratification. You don't have to wait for stuff to dry. Even super glue takes a while in comparison to a hot glue gun. I use hot glue gun for almost all of my terrain work, just because it's a time issue, and you don't have to. Usually the components are very large. You don't have to worry about detail being an issue. So we're gonna wait for this to heat up. Never have anything underneath your hot glue, because it's going to kind of drizzle out a little bit. We have dog hair here, which is super safe, but it's already starting to liquefy. So we'll come back in a minute and start gluing some stuff on. So while that heats up, I'm going to line up some of my pieces. First one, I'm going to use this cheapo Walmart sign and just kind of line up. I'm going to bridge the gap here. I think that'll make it really interesting. So I'll just kind of try to duplicate the shapes that we're using there and just hold it up to it. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially this orc terrain. It actually looks cooler if it's a little bit kind of messed up and different, right? Now, the great thing about this Walmart stuff is you don't have to use a knife to cut it. It cuts very easily with a pair of scissors. Alright, so what we're going to do with this piece is we're going to put it behind and let the actual pieces overlap. This will hide any issues that we have. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect that way. This way it will look nice and flush. So we take our hot glue gun, which you're never supposed to leave sideways. Put a dollop here. dollop there. And then okay, so now I've marked where I want my hot glue to go, and this is a little tough with one hand, but that's okay. You want to be quick. You're going to have little strings. There's nothing you can do about that. We'll clean that up after. And I'm placing it behind the actual terrain here, and that holds into place. Now it would be tougher, a lot sturdier if you did have a some kind of epoxy. This holds it now, right? Epoxy doesn't hold immediately, so what you can do is you can mix up some 2-part epoxy and kind of deposit it in between here. That way you have the immediate gratification of the hot glue holding, and then the sturdiness of a long-term epoxy hold. So what I like to use is the JB Weld 2-part here. It's not like other like the epoxy type products. It's not as sticky, and it's still gross and sometimes can be annoying, but it's easier to work with than some of the other things. You just mix this up until it's gray, fully constituted. This stays like this you can work with this for a little while. If you use a brush, it's going to be ruined. Just a warning. I usually use a scrap piece of plastic or a wand like this of some kind, or even my finger sometimes. Yeah, I'll put that kind of in between here, and that'll take a while to dry, but at least I'll be able to work with this, with it attached with the glue gun while it dries the resin. In the same method, we're gonna kind of, sometimes I like to take pieces of paper and do the same similar thing and then bring it over to my materials and cut it. This mesh is not precious, so I'm not worried about it. So I just cut a strip. And we know in our tournaments that we sometimes like to cover up these windows. Personally, I'm not fond of just saying, oh, you can't see through the windows. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with mesh, and then we're going to put a material over it later. I'll show you what that is when we get to it. But I'm going to put these here on the other. We're going to put it on the other side so that you can't see the contact points. So this will get shoved in here, and we'll hot glue that in a second. I'll show you the final product when we're done. Okay, so this is what it looks like with a few additions. You can go more crazy if you want. I mean, it just makes your table a little different from somebody else's table. And I bought 3 of these because I love these L-shaped orc buildings. So I'm just, doing it to add variety to the 3 that I bought, even though they all look really great individually. And it's hard to tell that they're the same because there's so many details. But it'll be nice to have a little variety between the 3 different, all 3 buildings. And also you'll note that when you see it later, when I finish them, I covered these windows all in different ways. There's also a method that we're gonna check out here in a second that uses sprue. So here you see I took some sprue and I cut it into manageable strips that are about the size of this window here. See these knobs? I'm going to trim those off right now. So I'll show you how I get these looking more like wood. Right, so we'll take our piece of sprue and our hobby knife, and we're going to score corners. That doesn't sound annoying. And just keep doing that for all of them. So my plastic pieces are all scored and cut. I actually kind of carved into these a little bit. That's why I really like this blade, the scalpel blade, over the pointed blade, because you can actually like get in there and dig in. I mean, never cutting towards your thumb ever. Oh no, 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 we don't do that. Huh. So with these, when you place them, you notice that your pieces always have kind of a good side and a bad side. This side still has a little burr from that piece of that little knob. This side is scored well, so I'm just going to pick that side to be out, and I'm going to place it like that. Here, I mean, you may want to just go ahead and use super glue for these, just because it's a small piece and you're going to actually see the results. So it'll actually be better to use super glue here. As you can see, our window is nicely boarded up, and once we get some more texture and some paint on there, it'll look really good. Some of them you want to maybe do some on the outside, but others you want to board up from the inside. Alright, I've spent a couple of hours going through and adding some additional pieces, covering up the bottom level, adding a little bit more to the parapets. Added a little sign here, which I find adorable. See, the added texture is really what makes it. Maybe just I should add rivets, but I don't hate myself. You can add rivets if you like. Some people use a leather punch that generally creates nice rivets. I also sometimes cut very long strips of plastic hard, and then I go through and I cut those into tiny squares, and that does well too. Some dags, some additional bits added to these really cool barricades. Same here. This inside the frames for the windows, I added some of that screening. Covered that hole. Here, the window. Some panels added to the top just for a little bit. Break it up a little bit. And I just added an entire plastic piece here of corrugated plastic just to have a different roof. Alright, so next we're going to get into texturing this terrain. We're now ready to texture our models. I'm going to start off by talking about the materials we're going to use in this video. First, we've got white glue or PVA glue, whatever you want to call it, water soluble. Very good. In a container you don't care about. Next, brushes. You don't want to use your nice soft brushes. You need some mean old brushes. Ones that they work for a living. You know, they're not your detail brushes or your wash brushes or your dry brush brushes. They're your mean old hard brushes that you're gonna get a good texture out of. This brush is actually a little too nice. Looking at you, harden up, mister. Rocks, they don't have to be natural colored because we're just going to paint over them. Ground up sprue and bits. I use a old style cast iron meat grinder to get these ground up. It's up to you. Sand. I generally get play sand from the hardware store. Next we have gesso, or gesso, I don't know, I guess it's gesso. This is the same stuff that artists use to put a pre-coat on their canvases. It's got a good consistency, good coverage, and a certain amount of elasticity, which is actually pretty important for our purposes. Super glue, for this purpose, grab one of your older pots or bottles of super glue, the one where the cap might not come off anymore, because this is the kind of project where you can just kind of, like, I have a coffee stir here, just dip it in, and we're gonna dab and affix our rocks with that. Good opportunity to use up that stuff. Last but not least, coffee. We need our coffee for this. So we're going to talk about this. The kind of consistency I'm looking for is kind of more of a stucco on the walls, and then like metal sheeting for the edge, or like these details. So to show kind of like this might be concrete or stone, then this might be some kind of steel or whatever they use in the 41st millennium. So I'm going to take some of this gesso, and then I'm going to apply it kind of liberally to the walls here. Don't worry about what it looks like right now. Alright, the wall portions are completely covered. I'm going to kind of wipe off the excess here on the stairs. Okay. You'll notice that the brush strokes are actually showing, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through here with whatever brush makes sense at the time. We're going to stipple. This is a lot easier with two hands, obviously. The secret is getting enough of the gesso on that it'll hold a texture, but not so much that it loses surface tension and starts to drip. So like inside here, that's probably too much. Since there's kind of a ledge there, that's okay, but if that were on the wall, it would start dripping down. Whereas this is picking up that texture. See at the top here, we have texture. Down here we still have to stipple some more because you can still see those brush strokes. And I'm not really getting much on these parts because, like I said, I want those to be more like sheet metal. Okay, you can put gesso on there and really thin, that way it takes paint a little bit better, but I mean, you're probably better off just putting multiple coats of paint on, really. I'm not going to put it on the floors either. We're going to do something a little different with floors and horizontal surfaces. So why don't I pause this, and I'll put gesso on the rest of the model, and we'll come back and talk about the sand. I also wanted to chat about different textures. So these, they could be sheet metal, but they could also be wood. In this case, I'm brushing them in the direction of the board. Or, well, at least the most likely direction of the board. A little bit heavier. I'm kind of just scoring the surface. Using different methods. Lightly and with a bit more pressure sometimes, depending. Sorry about the cars going by. And that texture is going to hold, right? So, I mean, this is terrain. This isn't, you know, a showpiece model. This is just terrain that we're doing here. So it's not like it's got to be perfect, but at least you have some additional texture there to kind of better depict what it is. That'll look really nice once we get it sprayed up. And again, it's not like plaster. Plaster is very brittle. The gesso has more of an elasticity to it. It's more like paint. It's acrylic, so it'll stay, especially when you get a nice coat of paint on it. Alright, this looks pretty great right now. You'll note I did some more scoring on these boards, and after it had dried a little bit, I went through and did another kind of stippling in the very center of these flat areas to get a little bit more texture. So that's going to look great. Now let's talk about white glue. I like to add a little bit. I'd like to add a little bit more in the way of texture in here, in these corners. So add a little bit of white glue here. We would go all the way around, you know. And also down here at the bottom, I think the base is the most important, because it can really give it that kind of tie-in with the rest of your terrain. And also, especially things like in Warhammer, we've got weird rules about whether models can take saves or not, whether they're on the base or on the terrain. So this lets you kind of get your model, the base, a little bit on there, you know, just a little cheatiness. Now the gesso is still a little wet, so I'm going to kind of just toss this in here. You can also kind of add a little bit of, like, just throw sand at your gesso to add a teeny bit more texture. So like you could even do this. It's kind of, some of it's going to stick. Now that's really interesting. It's okay if it gets everywhere. This isn't, you know, we're just having fun. So you'll see in there that the sand has stuck to the glue in those corners. That's where the sand and dirt would kind of collect and all the refuse. If you want, you could even kind of put a few little orky things in here. Like I have a million like ammo clips and stuff, and spent ammo casings. Like that I'm probably going to add a few of those using my super glue. If you look at these channels, you may want to go ahead add some glue there. You're going to use your thumb a lot. So look at that. So that's going to be really nice. It's going to add some texture there, and that makes a lot of sense. That's where a lot of that sand coming in off the desert would collect. When I finish this up and show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay. This sucker is ready for some paint. Well, we need to dry first. I would give it 24 hours, to be honest, because white glue is so spotty, you know, so iffy depending on the thickness. And when you're doing terrain, it's possible to get some real strange thicknesses. Plus we have tons of terrain to do, so we might as well get it all textured up. and we'll come back and see what we have left. This is what our terrain looks like on the table. It looks like I've got a good coverage of terrain. This is great for one table's worth of like ruins-like terrain. Very happy with this. However, I want to try to stretch this a little bit farther. I want to see if I can't get 2 battlefields out of this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build some hills to go with it. So looking at a good even half of the terrain, looks like we need a good line of sight blocking in each corner, and then maybe something lighter in the middle of each deployment zone. So we're going to need 4 hills per table. 2 L-shaped line of sight blocking and 2 smaller, maybe rhino-sized ones. When I build hills, I like to use the 2-inch foam board. It's just a little bit higher than your average Warhammer 40,000 mini, thus allowing infantry to hide behind one level of the hill. However, tanks will have a much harder time, especially against other tanks or things that are also up high on levels. They're definitely going to be able to see a tank, but one infantry can hide pretty easily. Now you can build them up to 2 levels, thereby hiding a tank from most things. And it also is good for when you're moving. So really tall hills, you get into situations where you're like, oh, well, I can move like to here maybe. So you got to wobbly model it. It's really nice to have, oh, okay, so this is 2 inches, so you can subtract 2 and just put them there. And then I like to build them in steps. Steps are not extremely realistic, but at least there's some level of height to your terrain, and people can have. It's a good simulation, and 40K is a simulation in a lot of ways. So it makes it easier. You can actually say, okay, these like 3 or 4 guys are on one level, and then the rest are up here. And since we don't have blast markers in 40K anymore, we really don't have to worry about levels and how we define levels of hills and crap like that. This is just very simple way of doing things, and I think it works really nicely. Let's talk about the size and shape of our hills. So we want a hill to be able to at least hide a rhino in most cases, like these L-shaped large corner hills. A rhino or a whirlwind should be able to hide and get its job done. Now, you would think that we would just draw a shape here and a shape there, and that's our hill. But there are some things you have to consider. Okay, so if I'm only going to do one level of hill, then the tank won't be hidden. So you're probably going to have to do 2 levels of this. If you're doing 2 levels of this, then it's 2 of these stacked right on top of each other, which I don't find, like I was saying earlier, I really don't find that as interesting. I want to be able to fit at least like 1 level of these guys standing and then another level up. So let's just assume that we're going to at least have 1 level of for infantry to stand on. I like to leave a little give here, a little room, because each level we're going to have kind of a slope going up instead of it being totally vertical. So leave a good like 1/4 of an inch or so between your base. This is a 32mm base. Between your base and the edges, okay? So then on the other side, we're going to have a similar thing. So at least that size. That'll give you enough room up here for a miniature to stand on and enough room on each side. Of course, I want it to be a little bit more interesting than all that, right? So I'll probably just do it that big for now, and then we'll worry about it later. So another thing is, how much of this tank do you want to hide coming at it from other directions as well. So right, I've kind of drawn it pretty well for that. But if you were too far in the corner here, all it would take is a tiny bit of movement to see the front of this tank. I definitely recommend, you know, for these big corner hills, to make sure that the tank can get nice and snug inside that deep corner there. It may be something where you want to like cut it a little bit on the inside, like that, or even cut here instead, and just have a full 4-inch slope on this side, and then a gradual one on the other side, or vice versa. You may want to make it harder to scale this front section, but easier to get up over here. Now, the gentler the slope that's next to the vehicle, the easier it's going to be able to see from far away. It's just how foreshortening works. It's how distance and rise over run works. So if this edge is a sharp 4 inches, you won't be able to see that even if you're several levels high on a building. Okay, so when I cut these, I'm probably going to do a couple different versions of them. So I just bought this insulation foam cutting knife. You know, I do have a hot wire foam cutter, but it's winter and you do not want to use a hot wire foam cutter indoors. So I'm going to do my initial cuts with this analog knife, and then once the pieces are all cut down to a manageable size, then I'll reshape them with the hot wire foam cutter outdoors in the -7-degree weather. Even when you're working with really big pieces of foam, the score and break method is usually the easiest, especially when we're dealing with just hills. Maybe if you're building something more complex, you don't want a rough break, but for our purposes, the score and break method is fine. Boom, and we're going to keep doing that throughout as we're taking apart these pieces and building our hills. As you can see, our hills are filling out our space pretty nicely. Some of them are a little super in rough shape, like this one. We have an overhang here. I'm just gonna cut that with the hot wire foam cutter. The knife is a little tough to work with, and the foam cutter is just so much faster. However, I wanted to show you what you can do with the knife. I mean, just with this knife, I was able to kind of trim away some of the edges and get it into a roughly organic looking shape here. Same over here. What I did was I just cut that piece so it's tall, but it's, you know, just horizontally cut from the sheet. And then you just trim the corners a little bit, and you're good to go. You might want to even glue some, I might do this, glue some knobs to the side so it's like sticking out. So I have some pieces here I'll probably glue to the side of the rock, the boulder. But yeah, this is a really inexpensive way of making some extra pieces, and it'll also add variety to the tables. How we're going to secure these pieces is with white glue, PVA glue. You should be okay. It's not terribly strong. We're just trying to hold it on here temporarily. The actual outer shell is going to hold it just fine. Okay, so for the hot wire stuff, I want to make sure it's not too close to the edge in case I cut into it with the foam cutter. You don't want to try cutting into the dried white glue with the foam cutter. If you have a smaller bottle, I have that giant jug, so that's not really great. If you just have the small bottle of PVA glue. Now, you might want to use wood glue. Wood glue is even better than the white glue. Okay, I'm just gonna let that dry. This piece, I'm gonna put in a dowel, a small wooden dowel. I'm gonna shove a dowel in there, then shove it into the end here, and then glue it there. Anything tall like that, you want to go ahead and use a dowel for reinforcement, or a piece of sprue. You know, you could just trim off a piece of sprue from a plastic kit. All right, here we are set up outside, ready to cut some foam with the Hot Wire Foam Factory. I've been using this for years. This is a great product. They do help out events and stuff, which is really nice. Let me show you how easy this is to work with. So recall, oh, and let's strap on my PPE here. Whew, okay, chilly day, but we did get about a table's worth or 2.5 tables worth of hills cut. So you'll see there's a nice hidey hole for most small to medium sized units, but it's also very easy to run up the hill here and get some models in position. It's true for all of these corner pieces. Okay, this one's a little smaller than I'd like, but it still works. Then we have some really funny taller pieces for the middle and for the board edge. I will probably end up on these, actually both of these. I'm gonna put a little piece of plastic siding, plastic heart here, and just kind of as a base around this one. First of all, so that it won't tip over as easy for these tall ones. And so you can put a tank here and claim cover in 8th edition 40K, which requires you to be on the terrain in order to get the benefit. So we'll have some area terrain there. So I'm forgoing the shaky video cam from here on out, so that since we're just looking at finished product now, so you can just see good pictures of what we have finished. So here we have the terrain has been using the same methods that we used for the actual buildings. We painted gesso over the entire piece, and then on the flat surfaces on top I use sand, so you can kind of easily get a tell of the difference between the sides and the top. And I did add some of the Walmart sign sheeting underneath, so that we can, you know, make it actual terrain for your vehicles, so that they can claim cover in situations where the rules are being adhered to literally. Then here it is after it's been painted. We had a quick painting session. Some friends came over and we went crazy with the hills and everything. Mainly the hills are dry brushed. It's very easy, and the buildings are quite easy as well. Looks great. Love the way these look. Adding some vibrant colors in addition to the brown really looks wonderful. Here's what it looks like at the tournament. There's the first table, and here's some action shots of the battles. And here's one that I had a little bit later. Added a river down the middle for this one. Orcs love their terrain. Get some really great
action going on inside these pieces. There's some really lovely, very dynamic, is what I'm saying. I love these tables. They're pretty much my favorite tables now, just because of the variety and the vibrancy and the cool designs. You'd doing yourself a favor picking up some of this terrain. I hope that this video series has been helpful for you. Leave a few comments if you have any ideas to make them better in the future. Okay, well, all right, this has been Adam. Loopy, I really appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.